The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
The great thing about the ancient alien theory is the fact that we can compare modern achievements with stories from our ancient past. And so, if today we're able to create a two-headed dog with 6 legs, is it possible that a similar creature existed thousands of years ago? And I say yes.
And I'm thinking, God, why is not the power of God moving? He said, because you haven't kicked that woman in the face. And there's this older lady worshiping right in front of the platform. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me. The gift of faith came on me. He said, kick her in the face with your biker boot. I inched closer and I went like this. Bam! And just as my boot made contact with her nose, she fell into the power of God.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Canary Cry Radio. Thanks for tuning in this week. My name's Basil.
And I'm Gonz, and we have for you today a brilliant couple. They are the voices of PID Radio, Peering into Darkness Radio. And they've been very vital in my walk, and I know for a lot of people who listen to the Revelations Radio Network. And it's Derek and Sharon Gilbert. How you guys doing?
No, we're doing great. Thanks for having us on today.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're excited to have you guys because personally, PID Radio and A View from the Bunker were very, very important shows and podcasts in my walk as I was trying to figure out, what's going on with the conspiracies and aliens and UFOs but I just became a believer and what does this all mean? And it was actually discovering L.A. Marzulli and then hearing L.A. on A View from the Bunker that opened me up to the community of Revelations Radio Network. And thank you so much for doing what you guys do because it really does make a difference. And I know it may not seem like it sometimes you're just talking into a microphone, but it does make a difference. So just wanted to say thank you on a personal level. But just to start off, can you guys give us a short history of why you guys started PID Radio and then how you got involved with Revelations Radio Network?
Well, it all started at a 5 kilowatt AM only AM radio station in West Mifflin. We started out looking for a way to market a series of novels that we had pitched to a Christian publishing company. Yeah, they were looking to bring out some cutting edge Christian fiction, and it had been our belief for some time that as science fiction fans that there's no reason that Christians can't read and enjoy science fiction. Most of it that's out there is written from a very humanist or transhumanist perspective.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very well said.
So we pitched a series that was picked up, and looking for a way to break through the clutter out there and make a name for ourselves on a very low budget. We turned to the tools that we had at hand, which were a couple of laptops and a couple of cheap headset microphones. And this new thing that had just been developed by Dave Weiner and Adam Curry called the podcast. This was in the spring of 2005. Curry and Weiner had just developed the XML format for RSS feeds for podcasting in the fall of 2004. And so we did a show in March of 2005, a 30-minute program on why people should buy our novels.
I'm not sure it was even 30 minutes. It may have been 15.
Yeah, something like that. And then we thought, okay, we need to do this as a series so that we can have content that's updated and a website that's dynamic with new things, give people a reason to tune in and become part of a community and fans. And then week number 2 came around and we thought, okay, we've already told people why they should buy our books. What do we talk about now? Well, we could do that again. No,
that's boring.
Yeah. So we decided to start talking about the things that motivated us to write. And that's where we started getting into some of the conspiracies and the unexplained things that are so intriguing and perplexing to most people. And again, it's our view as Christians that if we believe in a God, we say we believe in a God who is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, we should be able to address anything in this world and have a biblical answer for it.
Right. That's sort of the attitude I had going, looking into this stuff. And again, the first sort of year almost, I didn't really find solid, grounded Christians talking about it. You know, it was all the New Age folks talking about it, the Jordan Maxwell's, David Icke's, those guys.
Right.
And it really confused me for a while because it was, you know, and I've said this several times, but it was like there was one version of Jesus being portrayed through the New Agers, and then there was another version that I was hearing about on Sundays, and you know, reading the Bible, and it was like, how does the two sort of relate, you know, and in light of all the other stuff with the aliens and stuff. So did you guys naturally had sort of a curiosity or I guess a fascination with, you know, conspiracies and the supernatural, just because you guys were science fiction writers?
Well, I did. Gosh, I've always liked that kind of stuff. I mean, as a kid, I wanted to watch the vampire movies and the werewolf movies and the mummy things and all of that. And I read that kind of stuff when I was in what would be the equivalent, I guess, of middle school. We didn't have that. We couldn't afford middle school when I was a kid. But started probably age 10, 11. I started reading science fiction, and that's where my natural, you know, I guess interests or curiosities lie. Even though I've been a Christian since I was, probably 3-4 years old, didn't actually make a public profession of it in our church until I was nearly 9. My parents just said I was too young at 3 or 4 to know what I was talking about.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that's when I actually made the commitment in my heart. So I grew up believing in Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, and I never had a problem with believing in the supernatural, because by definition, if we're believing in a Jewish carpenter who died on a cross and then rose again of his own accord 3 days later, that's pretty supernatural.
Right.
So
right.
Christians, we should be able to just talk about that realm and have no problem with it at all.
Absolutely. Now, I love the way Guy Malone puts it. He said, and that's the price of admission to this club. It's supposed to make more sense from there.
Now, can I just say, before we get too far into this, just because I don't want to have to try to switch back to this before we get too deep into something or other, but your guys' voices are made for radio/podcasting. Okay, now God knew what he was doing when he set your voices into your bodies and put you on your path here on earth. And so if you kind of hear me disappear and I stop talking, it's probably because I've forgotten that I'm actually talking to you in person and thinking that I'm listening to your show. So just as a disclaimer, I'll put that out there.
You're very kind.
You are very, very kind. And honestly, I have to say that both of you have really good voices.
Oh, goodness.
But the cool thing is you have actual substantive content, that you discuss.
Well, yeah, I was telling Gonz before we started the program, Basil, that I had to drive for work down to Evansville, Indiana, which is about a 2 hour and 45-minute ride from here.
Right.
And listen to Canary Cry Radio almost all the way down and all the way back. With the exception of maybe 1 hour taken out to listen to Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak's podcast, No Agenda, and it was a really interesting contrast because you guys talk about the kind of really conspiratorial stuff that Adam Curry loves to talk about.
Right.
It's really funny because I remember when MTV was brand new and he was on with Nina Blackwood and JJ, whatever his name was, and the other guys. And now hearing him talk about the same stuff we discuss all the time is really kind of trippy. Except that he doesn't quite get the answer.
No.
And Dvorak is kind of a crime.
Right.
Love listening to Dvorak and have appreciated his work in the tech field for years, but they don't quite get the answer. They don't quite understand. They're missing that final piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And so many people miss the answer. There's so many people that you can find on the forums, the conspiracy forums on the internet, followers of certain conspiracy shows on the Patriot radio networks or whatever, and they're missing that final piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And
right.
I suspect that's why so many of them are bitter, angry, scared.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
People will sometimes say to us, "You guys are taking this stuff way too lightly because you guys are laughing all the time." Well, and that was kind of and I was listening to you guys and your approach, and Curry and Dvorak, they laugh a lot too. They're not ready to just call an end to it all. But there are those out there who follow these conspiracies out there who sound like they're ready to just go into a bunker and lock the door from the inside. Hey, our bunker's the split level at the end of the cul-de-sac. They know where we are, and we don't care.
Right.
And I hear the same kind of approach from you two fellas, and it was really wonderful to hear. And that's why it was so easy to listen to you guys for like 4 hours in the course of the day. It's really interesting stuff.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if I could listen to us for 4 hours, so I appreciate that.
Well, how did you guys get involved with Revelations Radio Network? Did you guys jump on board? How did you guys get connected with?
Remember? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, I do. Frank Lordy contacted us.
Okay, so sort of the same story as.
I'm creating my own reality. Don't ask me to answer that question. It's somehow just, I don't know. I deleted that file.
She's running a sentient world simulation.
I'm so happy.
And about the reboot before the end of the show. But Frank Lordy sent us a note out of the blue. And, at first we were like, well, I don't know, because, we didn't know Frank. And we've been very cautious about aligning officially with anybody because we experimented a little bit. And this is, frankly, my fault. My radio background thinking we had to be broadcast from a transmitting tower someplace in order to be official radio.
Right.
Instead of thinking, hey, with this internet thing, we're internationally syndicated. Dope.
Yeah.
Right.
I wasn't, Sharon was very patient with me because she got it right from the first. But we experimented with one of the Patriot networks for a month. We did 4 shows and then decided to call it quits. And it was mainly because the commercials that were interpolated into the show were for products that we really couldn't feel good about associating with.
Really? Like what, for instance?
Well, nutraceuticals of dubious value.
Right.
And basically preaching a salvation through guns and gold.
That was a lovely series of words, I must say. What was it? Why did you just say the
nutraceuticals of dubious value?
Yeah, there we go. Nutraceuticals of dubious value.
And you know what? You should see him when he says it because he's so cute.
Oh man,
they're going to be vomiting on that projectiles.
Look, most people do when they listen to our show.
Yeah, my brothers-in-law hate my guts.
They really do. They just hate seeing Derek show up.
Yeah. Sharon's sisters, and their husbands are like, cut it out. You're making us look bad.
But boy, does he say nutraceuticals of dubious value.
No.
So anyway, that was why we opted not to affiliate with a network or to try to buy our way onto a network. We just didn't feel comfortable going that route. We just felt we'll use the internet. My opinion is most of the people who listen to those Patriot networks aren't listening via shortwave radio anyway. We know a lot of conspiracy folks, and I can't name one person aside from us that owns a shortwave radio.
Right.
and we never use it.
No.
So if the internet is the means of delivery anyway, then why not just, do our own thing and let people find it as needed? But did a little looking and we communicated back and forth with Frank a little bit about his vision and what he planned to do. And, we said, well, look, as long as it's not, the shows themselves aren't tampered with, then fine. And, he and then Chris White have shown, I think, a lot of discernment on who they bring on. We don't all agree on all topics, but we agree on the core tenets of the faith. And so we have a problem with calling ourselves part of that group.
Right. Well, that's something I love about folks in our genre is that I think we're the best people at getting along, even though we might believe some severely different things, because we understand the core and we're down with the core, but because we talk about such, I don't know, for lack of a better word, crazy things, we're almost more well grounded in our craziness than some people are in their quote unquote orthodoxy or whatever.
That's a really good turn of phrase too. Well grounded in our craziness. See, that should be your tagline on your show.
You guys can use that one if you want.
We may add that to the website. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Let's see. Patent pending.
Yes.
Sharon Gilbert.
But you make a good point. At the Prophecy Summit at Branson, we had a real interesting roundtable discussion with Rob Skiba and Doug Hamp and L.A. Marzulli on the topic of the Nephilim. And we got into the discussion over the second incursion. Where did the giants after the flood come from? And you may know that Doug and Rob have a fundamental disagreement over where they come from after the flood.
Right.
It was a spirited debate, but afterwards there were all smiles and handshakes, and Rob and Doug who have no problem sitting down and breaking bread and talking in a cordial manner. But it was pretty funny during the discussion when Rob was saying, "See, now you take the Strong's Concordance," and Doug just sort of muttered under his breath, "Strong's isn't everything,
It's funny because Doug afterwards jokingly was like, "That Derek Gilbert, he brought it up again," because I think it happened twice, right?
Well, I think it was worth discussing because
so too.
People are discussing, and I knew that Doug and Rob could discuss the issue and not
get into
come to blows over it.
Yeah.
Because they understand that this is an ancillary issue. This is not one that you can disagree over and be sure that one party or the other is not going to make it into eternity on the right side of the fence. Right. We can disagree over that and be happy to find out who was wrong when we get into glory. So
right. Probably helps that there's not a grant money at stake either, too.
You really put that is so true. And I think that not only grant money, but there are so many who are making their livings, sadly, based upon book sales. And if they've got 30 years or 40 years history of selling a book on a certain topic, it's very difficult to come off that mountain and say, I may have been a little bit wrong on that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Now, when you say they're making their living on book sales, sadly, is that sadly for them or sadly for...
No. Here's how I see that. Derek and I are big believers, and I know that there are some in our genre, if you want to call it that, or in our circle, which, praise God, is getting larger and larger, that do make their living selling books or selling books that they published for others. Mm-hmm. My problem is when you are so invested in making sure that your livelihood comes from your personal opinion that you are blinded to the possibility that your opinion may not be 100% correct.
Right.
I think that's where the problem comes in. Derek and I, honestly, we make $1 here and $1 there, on book sales, and I'm literal about that. We make $1 here and $1 there on book sales. Praise the Lord, He has given Derek a really fine income that allows us to just try to give everything away.
Right.
And as long as we're able to do that, we will continue doing that. But, if he were to take away Derek's job tomorrow and say, okay, you guys are going full-time ministry, then to be honest, we would have to make our living on it. But to do so at the cost of truth, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. And it may be a pride issue as much as anything else. It's really difficult to look yourself in the mirror one day and say, everything I thought I knew is wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
And there may be, and I can't say that I know anyone in the circle in which we travel who
I don't know anyone in that circle that has that. Exactly.
Right. But certainly you know of cases out there where there are people who just refuse to admit that someone else, say in the field of research
paleontology.
Science or paleontology.
Right.
What my background before I came into this sort of odd world is in academia, and I know a lot of professors whose livelihood, literally, being able to remain in their professorship and sometimes the chair that they occupy is based upon their opinion in book sales.
Right. I was actually going to ask you about that, Sharon, because I know you have that background in biology, if I'm not mistaken. So, and I think it's really your sort of knowledge of that has helped. It's helped me understand anyway, things like transhumanism and just the genetic alterations happening today and everything like that. But just as this is sort of a personal curiosity. But what is your opinion on evolutionary biology? Like, how do you, as a Christian, do you believe that it happened? Or, I mean, you know, and then the sort of the second part of the question is, do you believe that there's sort of some kind of, well, obviously it sounds like you do. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
Sorry, that question's been voted down.
He didn't like that question.
About it.
Hey, guys, come on.
Is your dog named Darwin?
Okay, what was I saying? I don't remember what I was talking about.
Well, actually, you were asking if I, believe in evolution, and the answer is no.
Okay.
Not as defined by the evolution crowd. I had to take several evolution classes in order to complete my degree, and I had to write down the answers that they chose, and I inevitably said, according to the theory of evolution, this is the answer. And that caused them to very quickly figure out there's something about her, and they would actually call me in class and say, Ms. Ferguson, could you stand up and tell us how Christians feel about this one?
Wow.
And, I was happy to tell them, and I don't think that they're correct. I do not believe in one species evolving into a higher life form, so to speak.
Right.
However, I do believe that our genetic code is subject to environmental pressure and other pressures, and so because of that, mutations take effect, and you'll observe at what is called adaptation.
Right.
And I guess the tail end of the question before Tucker jumped in was that, so you do believe that there's some sort of scientific, I guess for lack of a better term, a scientific dictatorship, sort of a structure made, a systematic continuation of a lie, basically, to uphold academia. Sort of like what you were talking about with people in certain chairs. They are invested in evolution. Right.
And if they decry evolution as being false God, they will not continue in academia.
That's interesting.
If you want to teach, if you want to be a professor, if you want to succeed in the world of quote-unquote science, then you will, endorse evolution. In fact, there was recently, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was last year's, was it Miss USA pageant? And there was a big hue and cry afterward because the gal who won was the one contestant who answered that she did believe in evolution. And so there was this big question afterward, is that why the judges voted for her?
Huh.
I think the next question should be then, if the others are professing to believe in creation, why? With the follow-up being, and if you're truly a Christian, why are you in this contest?
Well, that's another topic altogether, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
To pay for my college education and to possibly get into movies.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I'm actually kind of interested in this paleontology little subject that came up. Is that something that you are familiar with?
Very basically. Yeah,
Very
that wasn't my field or anything, but, I had to. Right.
Well, I mean, here and there through my travels on the World Wide Web here, we start finding that paleontology is just a mess right now.
Yeah.
For so
what
many.
Was that story that you saw? You sorry about that to interrupt.
No.
You saw a story yesterday, Derek, about some sort of scandal about bones, skeletons.
The headline made me think that there was something to do with misidentification of a theropod, a cousin to the T-Rex. And actually what it was is somebody had put a skeleton which had been constructed from the bones, but from bones taken from Mongolia. And the Mongolian government, with the help of the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, has filed a lawsuit against the guy who was selling this specimen and got like $1.3 million for it at an auction because the nation of Mongolia has laws against taking dinosaur bones out of the country. They're considered a national treasure there, which makes sense. Mongolia doesn't have a whole lot else except sand.
Right.
And this collector somehow got the bones out, and the claim is, or what they're trying to prove in court, that this skeleton was no more than 70% complete, and the bones were from different specimens. And in other words, they didn't smuggle the whole skeleton out at once. But the way the headline read, it made it sound as though this was a chimera, sort of like the old Brontosaurus, which never was. The Brontosaurus was actually the skull of a different dinosaur put on the neck of a Chimerasaurus. And so now what to think of as the Brontosaurus is actually an Apatosaurus. But that wasn't the story. Again, the story was about this legal fight launched by the government of Mongolia to reclaim this skeleton that's being sold. So
right, and I mean this is something we're probably just going to touch on because I don't think anybody was prepared for this. But yeah, I mean I'm always coming across something like, oh well, now we discovered that velociraptors actually were bird-like and had feathers. And the Neanderthal man was actually loosely based on a bone that ended up being a pig's tooth. Mm-hmm. And, it's just stuff like that. It just seems like the whole field.
Well, there's so much money to be made on it. There are scams aplenty out there. You just have to be really, really careful on believing. And sadly, these things, like with the Brontosaurus, are being taught to school children as if they are fact.
Yeah, right. And there was a study that was done by an expert paleontologist from a university in Australia, University of Adelaide, in late 2004, where he went through the 200 existing skeletons of pre-humans and did measurements on cranial measurements on them, and found that when you graph the range of measurements he came up with against the range found in modern humans, Homo sapiens, that they all fall within the bell curve for Homo sapiens. In other words, all of these Australopithecines and Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons are all Homo sapiens. But as Sharon said, there's a lot of grant money at stake there, so there are always researchers and paleontologists who are trying to make a name for themselves by being the one to find the next new species. And this was about the time that back in late 2004, where they came out with the so-called hobbits that they discovered in Java, the island of Java. But this story that should have been, I thought, big news, came out the same day as that killer tsunami in Indonesia. And so story, got no attention, of course, because the tsunami was the big story for months after that. But,
well, a skeptical person might look at that timing and say, how convenient.
Yeah. We've had some communication with a professional paleontologist who teaches in academia now afterward, who said, well, that's not exactly what the study means and what it actually, so... there
is disagreement.
Yeah, right. Within the community as to what that study actually said. So,
right, and I mean, even down to things like different fossils from different time periods being found in different layers of sediment, and carbon dating being a complete, shot in the dark when it comes to being
accurate in dating.
Accurate in dating.
Well, that's true. It really is a shot in the dark. That's a good way to put it. But when I was in, class and we discussed how radiocarbon-14 dating is done, it was taught as if it were, absolutely core science. You can believe it every time. It's as reliable as waking up in the morning and finding the sun.
Right. And it becomes the go-to argument for people I'm talking to about these things. They go, oh, well, carbon dating. And really, they know nothing about carbon dating outside what they've heard on Jurassic Park. You know? It's almost just like something that you can point to and say, carbon dating.
Michael Crichton taught me all I need to know.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really would have thought that the discovery of soft tissue preserved in the leg bone of the T-Rex would have been another, smoking gun, or at least something that would cause people to question the official timeline.
Right.
And again, this professional that I've communicated with in recent weeks said, well, really, that's not all that unusual. And he, in fact, was doing some work on fossilized clams that had some soft tissue preserved in it. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Are you listening to what you're saying?
Yeah. And I trusted this guy, he understands what he's been taught very well. But when I was reading the research on it that was done from a Christian perspective, from a creationist perspective, it was pretty clear that scientists up until this discovery of this T-Rex leg bone, which was widely publicized in 2005, was that they knew of no process that would preserve soft tissue for more than a few thousand years, even if frozen. So, the response of the academic community, though, was, hey, what do you know? Now we know that soft tissue can be preserved for 65 million years.
Yes,
I know,
exactly.
it's just so unscientific. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy because it loses. It's losing. It loses. What's the word I'm trying to think of? This always happens to me. Credibility. It's losing credibility for the scientific community, and when they're trying to take credibility away from Christians, so now we have the believers and the scientists just put at odds for really no reason but human, pride and just nonsense. Mm-hmm. It just drives me completely bonkers.
Well, it's really, really sad when they insist this is what is true, this is what you will learn, or you will not pass this course.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And if you make this public profession of belief, you're going to lose tenure, or you will be denied tenure because clearly you're not qualified to understand science.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And just one last thing before we sort of drift away. That's the thing of fossilization, and the complete disregard for the actual amount of time it takes for something to fossilize. There's the mine shaft collapse in Australia, and they go through and they dig it up about 50, 100 years later. I can't remember exactly what the story was, but they go and they start clearing out this mine shaft, and they find a fossilized hat, a mining hat that had been fossilized in the pressure of this mine collapse. And and so you have this fossilized hat, which is obviously not billions of years old, and then they do carbon dating on the hat, and it says that the hat is like 80,000 years old or something.
It's time travel. Don't you know? People are going back in time.
It was a time travel accident where he time traveled underground.
Yes.
Up there.
That's really the best way to do it.
That's the tragedy when you materialize inside a solid. That's really
I know.
and fossilize there. Yeah.
Dinosaurs on a spaceship. That's what you want.
I want to take this conversation and sort of rabbit trail into something even deeper, because I feel like all of these sort of it's, I guess, not the crumbling of science, but kind of the like Basil said, sort of this paleontology being a mess and all this stuff. Do you think all of this is sort of a setup to maybe a grand ancient discovery, or we talked a couple weeks ago about potential life on Mars, some sort of paradigm shift that's going to be part of the Great Deception? What's your opinion on how sort of these end times situations are going to play out?
There's such a wide spectrum of potential directions that this could go. Certainly the education system is set up to get the public to believe that science has an answer for everything.
Right.
Even spiritual questions, because we see with the groups like the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was made famous in Dan Brown's Lost Symbol. And everybody thought the Freemasons were going to be the star of that book, and they were the MacGuffin. It was the Institute of Noetic Sciences that were really,
right.
Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, was one of the co-founders of the group, with a fellow named Paul Temple, who incidentally was also a major contributor to the was it the Brotherhood, the family,
yes,
which is the group that sponsors the National Prayer Breakfast every year.
Right.
The Presidential Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. So just bear that in mind when Christians start getting all up in arms that the president doesn't want to hold a national prayer breakfast, that the guy, a major financier of the group that sponsors it, is also the co-founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which, as Dr. Future described it brilliantly, I thought, is researching scientific ways to get possessed.
Wow.
Yeah, demonically possessed.
Repossessed.
Now, yeah. So right from the get-go, culture is indoctrinating us. Our society in which we are soaking is indoctrinating us to look for scientific answers, even to spiritual questions.
Right.
Look for scientific answers to our origins. And when paleontology breaks down and we can't prove it through the evolutionary process. Then we turn to the gospel of Giorgio Crazy Hair Guy and the ancient alien explanation.
Right.
I'm not saying it's aliens.
It's aliens. So it's like spiritual sand is being thrown in our eyes to blind us to the one truth. I mean, the enemy doesn't care what we believe as long as it's not the truth about the way. Anything else is acceptable, even if it's off by enough that we believe that it's our own works that get us there. That is better than having us believe solely in salvation by grace, through faith in Jesus Christ alone. Anything. So now, when you look at the potential explanations that people will accept other than faith in Jesus Christ alone, we could come up with all kinds of scenarios. We could come up with the enemy creating a false landing, with bogus UFO and fake aliens coming out to say, "Hey, we're your ancestors and we're back," to any number of potential scenarios. That seems to be the one that is most likely based on the cultural indoctrination, and not just through the education system, but through pop, entertainment, movies and television programs. But there's the transhumanist movement as well, in which we achieve apotheosis by becoming more than what we are.
Right. We definitely talk about that a lot on this show, and that was a partial question that I had was, do you think that it's something that the church at large should be at least talking about, or do you think we're just sort of flailing our arms and it's kind of a pointless conversation? Because I've come across folks who are in church who are, very strong, faithful believers, and they, when I bring up something like transhumanism, they kind of have a concern, but they're just sort of like, it's not a real important topic.
Well, let me tell you this. I think Jesus was concerned about his people, the body of Christ, being aware of the lies.
Right.
He went to great lengths in Matthew, is it 25, where he was saying, if he's here, if they say he's here, don't go there. If they say he's over here, don't go there. And he talks about the vultures gathering in the desert. He wants to make sure that we know ahead of time, and it's clear through prophecy. He's told us ahead of time what to expect. I think it's important that not only believers be well-versed in prophecy, but also be well-versed in anti-prophecy.
Right.
We need to know what's really coming so we can tell other people and help them to understand the books of the Bible that refer to things yet to come. But we also need to be versed in what the enemy is going to be throwing at us, because there are many Christians out there who they're true believers, but they are baby Christians. They've been, eating, just baby food for years and years and years.
Yep.
And when the enemy comes along, they could get swallowed up whole.
Right.
It's like you said before, God, that's Matthew 24, by the way.
24, 28, yeah.
I was close.
Yes. Right zip code. But it's like you said before, Gani, that you as a new Christian, we're hearing one Jesus preached on Sunday morning, and then another one fed to you by the culture through the rest of the week. And that's the sort of History Channel, Nat Geo, Discovery Channel Jesus that we get on our television programs. The Jesus who was possibly an alien,
right,
or possibly just deluded. And the real gods are the ones that Ezekiel saw flying, the wheel within the wheel,
right,
who planted us on Earth and tinkered with our DNA. And I can understand L.A. Marzulli's frustration when they had the flap with the UFOs spotted near Stephenville, Texas, and people were stunned because here was something that was completely outside their paradigm. They had no frame of reference for what they were seeing. And the churches, even though L.A. offered to go down at his own expense and speak and to say, here is what you are seeing. It could be a government project, but if it's not a government project, and this is something that is outside of the science that you and I know, here is what we know about this phenomenon, and then go through the messages that are consistently reported by contactees and abductees, how that squares with Scripture, and then what we know about the abilities of fallen angels, the kind of work that Paradox Brown has done into what they do and how they can manifest and how they can deceive people into perceiving things that aren't really there.
Right.
The abductee, contactee phenomenon, and again, compare all of that against Scripture, and give people a frame of reference so that if they are confronted by something like this, they can address it, or if they've already seen something like this, they now have a mental file cabinet in which to put it away and accurately file it away. So this is a deception from the enemy. There are people out there who are, as you say, good, faithful believers who, when confronted with something that they cannot explain through their Sunday school level understanding of theology, will junk it and try to embrace a new worldview that does explain this. And if the only guy who's been explaining it to him is the guy with the crazy hair on the History Channel, that may be what they believe.
You are so right. There is a hunger out there. Even within the church, there is a huge hunger, and it needs to be fed. And if Crazy Hair Giorgio is the only one feeding them, that's the doctrine that young believers and unbelievers are going to assume. We've got preteens and teenage girls who are falling for the vampire line. And it amazes me and it really disheartens me that so many Christian families are letting their daughters read that tripe. And for some reason, and some of this stuff is even sold in Christian bookstores. It just kills me that this stuff is being force-fed our children, and it's not from a Christian worldview.
Right.
Okay, she's a virgin.
Yeah.
She's not slept with him yet, so she must be, like a believer or something.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
It's moral. It's a good moral tale because he won't, touch her until she's married him.
No, excuse me. Your daughter is lusting after a vampire. That's why she's reading the book.
Excuse me. I just imagine you coming up to just the pair of parents. Excuse me.
Oh, it's happened. It's happened. I have, I've done it because I've got people in my family and my friend circle whose kids have been reading those books, and yeah. I don't get invited to those parties anymore.
Yeah, Sharon goes all Pentecostal.
It's a tough life. I know how it is.
Well, it's funny because there's so many things you guys said there that I just totally feel. Some other concerns, I suppose, are just within the church, the different teachings that are from the outside. I guess they would appear Christian, but certainly not. Rick Joyner, Todd Bentley. Interestingly, I bought early on as I was trying to sort of figure out what was going on. I went to a Christian bookstore and I went to sort of the charismatic section, and I found a book by Todd Bentley. I had no idea who he was or anything like that. That was probably my fault for not researching. But I picked up the book and I started reading it, and literally a page into it, I thought, there's something not right about this. Because he was talking about, I had a vision and I got taken up to the third heaven and there I was in the sea, I saw the sea of glass and all this stuff, and I'm going, is he just sort of being, is he being allegorical or is it literal? And then he starts talking about his angel and all this stuff. It's like, okay, something's not right. So I look it up, and it was right after he had he took off with some woman in the congregation or something. I can't remember exactly what happened.
It was during the Lakeland revival when
the disastrous end of the Lakeland revival. Sure,
right. And then it wasn't too much later that I discovered everything VFTB and PID radio and everything. And then you had brought up. I think you did a whole. I don't know if it was a whole episode or not, but you had brought up Todd Bentley and Rick Joyner and some of these movements that were happening within the church that was sort of not, in dominionism and things like that. I had no idea, but it made a lot of sense to me. And it's sort of weird because as a new Christian, being exposed to that already was very eye-opening too, because I started sort of seeing it in my own church. And I don't know, I felt like it was either I'm really going off the deep end, or even as a very young believer there, I noticed something wrong, or not wrong necessarily, but sort of headed in the wrong direction, if you will, even within sort of the institutionalized church system.
So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar, may not have listened to that particular episode, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Gonz is talking about?
Well, there's a hyper-charismatic movement within the Christian church in America that believes they have been commissioned by God himself as modern-day apostles and prophets. I mean, capital A, apostle, capital P, prophet, with all of the authority and power of the biblical apostles and prophets, and that they are called to serve as God's government on earth. And so it is their responsibility to take over planet Earth so that Jesus can return, because he will not, or perhaps cannot, return until we establish dominion over the planet.
And they insist that there needs to be a paradigm shift within the church to a different way of thinking. That the way the Holy Spirit has led us to believe and think for 2,000 plus years needs to be revamped.
Now, what sort of dominion are you talking about here?
They're talking about actually having governmental authority and spiritual authority over. There's an approach within this movement called the 7M or 7 Mountains approach, 7 Mountains mandate, and you can even find a website out there that is it 7 Mountains numeral 7 Mountains.com or something like that. I'm going to look it up here so I don't steer you to the wrong site, but. The theory is this, and this is based on a vision that Bill Bright, co-founder of Campus Crusade, allegedly had, in which God showed him 7 mountains of culture on which human society is built, and that's like arts and entertainment, and business, and education, family, government.
Did they just add science? Was that the...
Science was a new one that was just added in, I think, because I think they added arts and entertainment together as one, because I think previously arts was one, entertainment was another. But anyway, there were 7 mountains altogether, and they believe it is the duty of Christians to establish authority, dominion over those 7 mountains: government, family, business, education, religion, all of it. And serve as God's government, and these apostles and these prophets will be God's literal government on earth, so that when Jesus returns, he will already have a governmental hierarchy in place with which to rule. And there are some more extreme examples of that, but that in a nutshell is what this is all about.
Yeah, I think reclaim7mountains.com is one of them. And,
that's the one.
And under arts and entertainment, there's this really creepy face there, but. This was something, Basil, I was going to actually talk to you about, because very interestingly, Basil for our church did a little video for the National Day of Prayer this year. And I believe they were handing out a pamphlet, and there was, I believe it was like the same thing. It was praying for the 7 sectors of society or something like that. And yeah. And do you remember that, Basil? You made the video. I remember you made the video.
Yeah, I did. That the one with the words on it.
The moving words.
The one with the words.
And the ethereal music that put you in a trance.
Right.
Good job on that.
Yeah, I was into that.
But yeah, it's interesting how that sort of correlates. And then at the same time, I think there was a past episode that Basil and I did that we looked at Svali and some of her experiences growing up allegedly in an Illuminati family. And they even had the same division, the same stuff with, arts and entertainment, business, education / science, government, media, religion, whatever, all that stuff. They even had different sectors where they operated. And, some people had emphasis on a certain sector, and then others had others. But I think it's interesting how there's this sort of overall perception of how to conquer the world, if you will, and there's like this mandate to do it. And again, very disturbing that it's a Christian.
We're not told to go out and reclaim 7 mountains. We are told to preach the gospel.
Right. And I have no doubt that if we were able to reclaim dominion over those 7 aspects of culture, arts and entertainment and the media, business, education, family, government, religion, It helps having the notes on the screen. That we would, in fact, control human life. But that would essentially mean having to impose biblical morality on people who don't believe in the God of the Bible.
And what did Rick Joyner have to say about that?
Well, he said, at first it will seem like totalitarianism. And we've referenced this quote a couple of times, and you can still find this posted at the Elijah List today. It's a statement, a piece that he wrote a couple of years back. The Elijah List is sort of like the mailing list for visions and words that these so-called prophets claim that they've been given by God. And Rick Joyner said that at first, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it up in front of me, but he said at first it would feel like totalitarianism until people learn how to live, basically. And then they could, move to greater areas of control, or lesser and lesser control, rather, once they learn how to live. But what he's describing is totalitarianism.
It sounds like the Ministry of Love in Oceania in 1984.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it really does. Well, even the Huffington Post has an article about that back in September 14, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
May seem like totalitarianism. That's how they quote it.
Yeah, and that's was Rick Joyner. There are two paths to totalitarianism. One is to impose it by taking over the planet and forcing people who don't believe to live by our rules, which was never what Jesus called the disciples to do. In fact, he said the opposite. If anyone won't listen to your message, shake the dust from that town from your sandals and move on to another town.
Yeah.
Leave them be to their fate. Jesus told them what their fate would be. He said it'll be worse for you on that day than it was for Sodom. The consequences are not in this time-space continuum. There will be a price to be paid, but those are on God's timetable, not ours.
Right.
The other path to totalitarianism, of course, is to withdraw from the world in our own little enclaves and completely withdraw and not influence the world at all, and then let the enemy sort of have sway in all of these areas of culture. We are to influence those around us by sharing the gospel and demonstrating the love of Christ to them, but not by trying to tell them how they have to live.
Yeah. And honestly, that's where I think I tend to part company with some in the Christian community, and we're talking about those that are lobbying politics and things for to repeal Roe v. Wade. I detest abortions. I think abortions are absolutely wrong, but I think that approaching that sin, frankly, politically, it's just not going to work. You have to change people's hearts. You cannot legislate Christianity, true Christianity.
Right.
You have to deal one person at a time and spread the gospel according to the means that you have and the opportunities you have, and let the Holy Spirit take it from there.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, even just historically, we know that, theocracies are just as much of a mess as paleontology is.
Yeah. Technically speaking, speaking of theocracies, technically speaking, the United Kingdom is a theocracy.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Because the Queen of England literally, and you can even say this about many of the kingdoms around Europe and even in other countries, that technically the mandate comes from God. God put her on that throne. Therefore, she's almost like the Pope. She represents the Church of England and God.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. The nation definitely doesn't, at least at this point in history, doesn't reflect that.
There are some wonderful believers in the UK. There really are. But like any country, for the most part, most countries are secular, and secular humanist.
Yeah, definitely. Boy,
I'm thinking about this. Because, and just to make the distinction, the Queen of England being more of an extension of God's hand rather than, the leader of God's appointing at, a certain point in time. Because, people could say that, every leader of every country, is there because God has allowed them to be.
Well, I suppose you could say that, but they say by heredity, they have,
Right.
this is what is believed, the crowned heads of many countries say that their mandate comes directly from God.
Right, that they are divine, sort of like,
Yes.
like the empire of Japan.
Well, yes, exactly.
Right.
Which I think recently sort of revealed, we're not descendants of gods, because I think that was what they were, at least in Japan, from what I understand, they were saying that, the royal family are descendants of gods. They're not like human, but then,
Well,
I think that,
in ancient Egypt, I'm not so sure that they even claim to be descended from gods. Although Giorgio Tsoukalos would argue that
he would argue that he is the descendant of
that hair alone. I think is a descendant from something. But they claimed that they had a pipeline, a direct pipeline to God, or the god or the goddess, either Osiris or Isis, and they were the embodiment of that god or goddess on earth.
Right.
And that makes so much sense if you look at, historically, the sort of the ancient mystery religious system that sort of secretly kind of continued on and I think infiltrated all sorts of secret societies like the Freemasons and all this. And then you look at eugenics just in the last century. I think it all ties together. It seems like nothing's really changed a whole lot. Really, nothing's new under the sun. It's really true. I think the same sort of agenda, and it's Satan's agenda from the garden, that he, got started there is still going on. And it's just very strange when you start looking at some of these things and you realize that, nothing's changed. We haven't really we've gotten better at using tools and whatnot, but as far as the human soul, the condition of the heart, it really has not changed since the garden.
No.
Right. Okay.
So that's one thing it amazes me about the New Age movement, that they feel that somehow we're going to, improve ourselves to the point because, clearly we're so much better and more enlightened than they were 3,000 years ago that,
Well, yeah. And that's what the eugenics movement was. Well said there, Gandhi, that really has its roots in the garden, even though it didn't begin until the mid to late 19th century.
Right.
Right. So going from there, I'm just curious as to what you two think about December 21st of this year.
Bears by 3.
I think that sums it up.
I think the Colts are going to be out of it by then.
All right, there you have it.
I think Chris White has pretty much done the definitive work on that. It's a deception. It's a scam. And it's intended to, just more spiritual.
We're being programmed to accept something.
Right.
Big on that date.
Right.
I was just thinking too, I'm recently sort of the buzz that I've been hearing, at least in sort of treading through the conspiracy sort of circles, is that, now they're looking beyond 2012. They're looking at, something's going to happen in 2015, 2016.
Yes.
It's sort of like, you guys
funny.
are already preparing for
It's so funny.
the lack of events that are going to occur that day, except for the fact that, thousands of pages are going to be complete, waste.
Well, there are some who crave doom and there are some who serve it up.
Well, they're looking at all the ridicule that was heaped on. What was the name of the radio minister from California who predicted it was going to end twice last year?
Yeah, last year. Yes, that was hilarious.
Used for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, didn't he say that it was postponed until October of this year?
It was last year. It was October of last
year.
year.
Was it last year?
Yeah. Camping, Harold Camping.
Camping. Right.
Yes.
So, he came up with a secondary date, and that came and went. So, I suspect the December 1st crowd are, as you say, Gunny, they're already setting up for their fallback positions.
Yeah, and, just a quick commentary on, folks who set dates and stuff. It really doesn't help the community of believers and people who are trying to do this work, Yeah. I know for... In the film Age of Deceit, I tried to sort of address that because I was making it after the fallout of Harold Camping. So I mentioned it in the film, saying like, look, so many predictions have been made and they've failed, and so there's this sort of sour taste of prophecy. But that's not the point. The point isn't to set a date and know exactly when things are going to go down. So, that just
So you put another way, what part of no man knows the day or the hour did you not understand?
Right. Well, interestingly, I will say that phrase actually is talking about one of the feasts that do you know this, Sharon?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so it's not like...
Yeah, it's a metaphor, not a metaphor. It's a, what am I trying to say? Euphemism for Feast of Trumpets.
Right, exactly. And that's Feast of Trumpets actually like next week or something.
It's coming up. It's usually in September, sometimes early October. It is the only feast, if I can remember correctly, that actually spans 2 days and sometimes 3, depending on where you live in the world, because it has to be 2 witnesses agreeing upon the sighting of the new moon.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I know some people are like, oh, the rapture's next week. So if it is, sweet.
Well,
see you guys in the air.
It is. And if it happened, I think that it's a good argument that it could happen during the Feast of Trumpets. I think that makes sense. But you know what? I'm not God, and he gets to decide when it happens.
Right. Yeah, personally, I believe
really did. Nobody would know.
Yeah, that's true. I believe he's going to be very graceful, and he's going to try to hold back as long as possible to get everybody, as many people as he can saved. That's
I believe that. I was always taught, Ghani, that God has always known exactly how many people would comprise the final body of Christ. And when that last person is saved, that's when it'll happen.
That makes sense with the couple scriptures in Revelation that talk about the number of saints that were, martyred and things like that. So, yeah, it makes complete sense.
All right.
Complete sense, honey. Mark it down.
We made sense of something here. That's great.
All right.
We're in agreement.
One
for me.
Well, awesome.
Oh, no. Why do I have all these little tally marks all over my body?
I scratched mine into the side of my cabinet here. So
and it's Doctor Who references in the show too.
I used to watch a lot more of that. I don't know if can I find that on Hulu or something, or is that?
Oh, yeah.
You can find it on you can find it on Netflix and Hulu, but the brand new ones you can get the very next day on Amazon for $1.99.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well worth it. And that was the dinosaurs on the airplane reference.
Yeah, because we don't have cable or anything anymore. We watched the brand new one yesterday.
There you go.
Cool.
So, little plug for those guys.
Though it did have a biblical reference, because the man who was collecting all of the animals was Solomon.
Ah.
Yeah, not the Solomon.
Well, it's hard to say. It could have been the Solomon. You don't know.
Well, don't you love that?
Time travel. It's anything possible.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, it's been very, very fun having you on the show. So thanks for coming on.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for asking us.
Absolutely. Great. Derek and Sharon Gilbert, everybody. Check them out on PIDradio.com. Thanks for listening this week to another episode of Canary Cry Radio. And as always, think outside the cage. That's the new music we have now.
Outro. Ooh.
Cool.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. The show notes for this episode and many others are available at canarycryradio.com. Make sure to connect and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/canarycryradio. Follow us on Twitter at Canary Cry Radio. If you would like to share the show in video format, you can find us on YouTube by searching Canary Cry Radio. Review us on iTunes with 5 stars and give us a thumbs up on stumbleupon.com. We would like to thank those of you who have given us your support, prayers, and donations. If you would like to join us and support Canary Cry Radio financially, you could do so by visiting canarycryradio.com and clicking the support tab. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, remember to think outside the cage.